So, thank you so much for joining me, Anne.
Thank
So
you.
today we're speaking with Anne Moorhouse, the author of Not Forgotten, and her talk is going to be on all of the issues that come along with writing someone else's biography, and I'm really fascinated about that because I've been approached by a few people, family members mostly, and they're like, oh, you know, I've got a really interesting life story, can you write my life story? And I'm like, I know you. So tell us a bit about Not Forgotten.
So Not Forgotten is the biography of Samilya, who was in an orphanage in Far North Queensland, St Joseph's Orphanage in Neerkol, for most of her childhood. So she wasn't an orphan, she was actually, as in the times, if single mothers couldn't support their children, they were placed into orphanages. But it was a horrible place. And so I will leave you, rather than expand on the trauma here, but leave you to imagine a Catholic orphanage, 400 children, I think, 15 nuns.
So it's already shrouded in a lot of shame.
A lot of shame, a lot of abuse, a lot of neglect, minimal education, no warm clothes, and, even though it's in Rockhampton, in winter it got cold, poor food, it's not a good place to be a child.
Yeah.
And her brothers were also in the same orphanage, so 2 brothers that she had, and she didn't know them. So that she didn't even know that she had siblings there.
Oh, wow.
So the boys and the girls were kept separately, and so, So really it's a story of what happened to her and how it impacted on her as an adult and throughout her life. And I'm a psychologist, and so my role was to narrate the story and then to provide the historical scaffolding and the psychological understanding of how this trauma impacted her, and to unpack that, because people will often think people's behaviour is just odd, but it's often driven by trauma or
absolutely. I feel like psychology plays such an important role in stories.
Yes.
In story writing in particular, being able to understand the human condition and to understand, I think that's why we've had a big shift as well in villains in recent history. So I feel like all through the 1900s, it was very easy to spot the villain. They were sinister, they were the bad guy, they were doing the bad thing.
Yes.
They were being different in society.
Yes.
And then you hit the 90s or even the 80s, and especially in the early 2000s, rebel and punk and goth and all of these things that were intentionally deviant from mainstream society. It was at the 80s or the 70s that punk came around. We had a woman in last year who was like, I was in that era.
Okay.
But that deviation then suddenly gave motive. We started to understand the villains. We started
from a more subtle place.
So we started to look at why someone's acting differently. What caused that, and is it justifiable as a good action, or are they still being selfish and a villain? And I feel like that's a really big distinguishing factor today in our villains.
Well, the villains in Samilya's life were garbed in Catholic ordained dress, and certainly we haven't gone into any understanding of why they did stuff
and I feel like when it comes to that, it's such a power thing.
Definitely.
And that is where a true villain lies, when they wield power without remorse.
Oh, absolutely.
That's when you get true darkness.
And they repeat it.
Yes.
They repeat it again and again, and they use their power to gaslight people and and that's what makes a villain. But then I'm sure Samilya left with Samilya, sorry. She left with a lot of trauma, you said. Absolutely.
And so that other people might see her actions as being a villain, but we now have an understanding of why that is. And it's not through a selfish reason, and it's not through a lack of growth. It's not through, it really just boils down to being selfish. If it's selfish, it leans on evil. So after she How did she leave the orphanage, or is that something that you want to keep secret in the book?
No, not really, because I think it's on the back cover.
Oh, okay.
So she then went to live with her mother. So
Yep.
she was returned. So imagine
Ooh.
3 children who've been in an orphanage with minimal education, have no connection to each other, are returned to the care of their mother, who had her own trauma and history and difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
And so really she went from one abusive, neglectful situation into another.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you know, I mean, Samilya certainly sees her mother as a villain.
Yeah.
I see her, as a psychologist, I see her as a really traumatised single mother trying to survive. But yeah, I mean, she certainly had some nasty characteristics.
Yeah, definitely. Oh my gosh, it sounds like a really powerful book. All in Rockhampton.
When she left the orphanage, she went to Mackay. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But still in Queensland.
Yeah,
Like,
it's very much a
having
Queensland story.
Having it local sort of hits harder.
Yes,
It really is like, I have been there. That energy is some kind of, it's there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, that's
fascinating.
interesting. So after I'd written the book and was really deep into kind of drafting it, I went to Neerkol. I went and I stood where I wanted to stand where Samilya had stood. I wanted to feel the same sun on my back that she felt. I wanted to see what she would have seen if she'd been outside. And it's just, it gives me shivers down my spine now.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating, really, because it's surrounded in fencing and says, "Do not enter, dangerous place." I think
Did you sneak in?
Yeah, we climbed over and snuck in. But I didn't go too far because it's collapsing. It's debris, and it's just horrible. It's just and it's so much smaller than I imagined.
Oh, yeah. I feel like in our minds and the way we see things through television, through cartoons and that sort of stuff, they always make the space feel bigger.
Yes.
It's kind of difficult when you're filming to make a space feel particularly small unless you've got it very cluttered.
Yeah. And in my imagination, I'd had, there's all these children, it's going to be this big space, but it was actually a small space.
Ooh.
And to think that she didn't know her brothers who were in a different building and a very small space between them.
That's incredible.
It's incredible. She has had an incredible life.
So how did you go about finding Samilya and writing her biography?
So I met Samilya because I was working with her daughter.
Ah.
So I met Samilya when I was working with her daughter Bettina, and I just got to know Samilya, and she would say, "Nobody ever understood. Nobody understands what I've been through. I wish somebody would understand." And she would actually, she's written to so many people. She's sort of is an archive of material, and she even wrote a bit of a blog once, and so she had been desperately trying to tell people what had happened to her. So naively, I thought, I'm a psychologist, you're not my client, and she's never been my client, and we can just sit here and have a chat, and then I'll just go off and write this book, and it'll be like a fiction story. It'll be a narrative that is told, and you'll be able to read it like a fiction story. Well, none of that happened, really.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time, but very slowly, because every time she spoke about it, she was re-traumatized.
Yeah.
So in a way, only a psychologist could have written her story.
Yeah.
And it was a very slow process, and yeah.
How long did it take to get the information so you could write the book? Or were you writing it throughout this process?
I was writing it through the process, so she would tell me stuff and then I would go back and write up about it. But I was working, I would go and see her and away at night, and sometimes I would get information out of, from her, and sometimes I would get almost nothing. But Yeah, and I would want to ask her about this, and she would tell me about that.
Yes.
And that always became part of the book, but it was like,
Yeah.
Yeah, and it took a long time for her to trust me, to trust that I was going to carry through and finish the story, finish the book.
Yeah. It sounds very clear that she wanted to be heard. Like that. It nearly feels like it was bursting to come out.
Yeah.
And not be mistranslated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
Yeah.
So, your talk is about fighting through frustrations.
That's right, yes.
So, you'll be able to see Anne on the Friday of the Writers' Festival, September 9th. And she'll actually be doing a workshop on this. So please, anyone that's got lots of questions or wants to work on writing someone else's biography or even your own, come and see Anne. She is going to give you all the groundwork you need to not step on the landmines that accompany this space.
Or to look after yourself when you do step on the landmines. Because I think it's like, undoubtedly, you're going to come across things that you didn't expect, that you... and it's about how do we keep going regardless of what shows up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are some of the points that you will be talking about in your talk?
Well, I think really, so we often think of resilience as an internal factor, something, are we resilient? But I would say that there's way more to resilience than that, and that part of what you need is your protective factors. Now, if you know that, okay, to be more resilient, I need to have these things around me, like education is a resilient factor.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, yep, being educated, well read, or educated in any form, is a resilience factor. So if you know that you don't have to bear the burden of being resilient, that you can actually put in place factors or a team or people that support that, then that burden is eased a bit. So, for me, one of my resilience factors was that, and this is a blessing, I was in a book group of with 4 other women, 2 of whom were psychologists, two were psychologists and 2 were social workers. What a gift! What a gift! I didn't have to go out and find that. But they were my first readers. And so they gave me...
Oh, what good feedback.
What good feedback.
What a good beta reading team.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's about picking that, isn't it? And I think, actually, as we're talking, because the talk is not quite prepared in all its glory right now.
Mine isn't either. So I often have about 5 points and wing the rest. It works out fine. So
I think one of the things that I particularly did well is to receive feedback.
Yes.
And I think that is where you actually need to be internally resilient, because it can slam you like a freight train. People will go, well, that won't get published looking like that, or you can't do that, or what about this? And so how do you hear that? Because there's always, in every feedback I got, there were nuggets of gold.
Yeah.
But often I had a whoa, a real emotional reaction to.
It really depends on who you're receiving it from as well.
Yeah.
You kind of become accustomed to, I know this person's going to be really blunt, but the information they provide is rock solid.
That's right.
I know this person is going to slather it in praise, and I have to dig out what is actually happening here.
Yes.
It's really important. And some people, when you find that you're feeling injured constantly by their feedback, they're probably not the best person to get feedback from.
Maybe it's triggering something in you and you're not able to hear the information. And that's part of being resilient, isn't it? It's about thinking about, who is the feedback coming from? Am I not hearing it because it's kind of personally impacting me, and they've actually got really fantastic information, or is it just the wrong person?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And so many authors, that's the one thing they're terrified of. They don't publish or they don't promote as strongly as they can to be successful because they feel frightened of that feedback.
Absolutely.
So often people come in and they're like, but what if someone doesn't like it? I'm like, it wasn't written for them.
Yeah. And I'm lucky, you know, the two men in my life. My son was a basketball referee. Now you think, what can that teach you about resilience? But he, from the age of about 10 or 11, he was a basketball referee.
Oh, wow.
And as a basketball referee, you are on show the whole time and you're critiqued by someone else. So he constantly had feedback on his performance.
And you'd have a whole bunch of people yelling at you and booing
and parents
you.
of children.
Oh my gosh, that's the worst. If you're a child and a parent starts going off at you because that you made the wrong call. Oh
so just watching him learn how to do that was fascinating. And then my husband is a musician in his fun life, you know, and to be able to get up and perform, and I mean, that's really scary, isn't it? And writers often write in rooms, don't they? Hidden away from the world. And yet other artists are very on show. So it's like, how do we be on show and maintain our own sense of well-being and confidence and allow people to say they liked something or they didn't like something and be okay with it?
Yeah. And understanding that you're looking at their feedback through your lens.
Yes.
Which came through their lens.
Yes.
When you wrote it through your lens. So it just keeps building up on all of these things that compound. And it's like, well, you're not looking at the facts. And the fact is, this person said this because they felt this way about it because of whatever reason they felt about it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons I like my editor so much, because I know that she looks at it and she can tell me if she likes it or not personally, and she can also tell me if the wider audience is going to understand it and like it.
Yeah.
Being able to separate those two minds, so valuable.
Yes.
So valuable. She's one of the only people I'll ever take feedback from. And other people have seen her feedback and they're like, oh my God, I would die if I got that feedback. Oh, how do you do? And I'm like, well, she loves me. So why wouldn't she give me feedback that's going to do good?
Yeah. So I think you've helped me structure the talk today.
Wonderful. When I upload this, you can rewatch it and then just hit all the dot points.
I definitely think that part of the resilience of writing is around being able to take the feedback.
Yes, 100%.
Yes, and to be able to hold it out here, examine it, take what's useful, and let the rest of it go.
I think that's another really good thing about the Writers' Festival. Instead of giving your work, so many people will say, oh, I gave it to a family member and they said they hated it, or they said, and I often hear this, is out of fear they told you to get a real job. And it's got nothing to do with your writing. They were just worried that you were going to pursue an art and that's not a real job, and that annoys me so much. But it helps you to find a community where you can share your work and say, hey, can you please just tell me what you like about it? Or can you please help me find which sentences are too long? And you have people around you that understand what that means and understand how to get it to flow. So for everyone that needs good feedback, please, you've got to come along to the Writers' Festival. And
Absolutely.
It's not just for authors either. It goes for musicians, poets, script writers, fan fiction writers. You can do game writing with it. Like, there's so many, TV writing, so many facets of writing that people don't realize that someone was behind that. They're just like, oh yeah, it was just the actors. It's just the musician. It's so valuable to know where and when to get feedback from.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that interests me about the points that you gave me was talking about the legal side of writing someone else's biography.
So it wasn't so much when I said we faced some legal processes. wasn't so much the legal side of writing a biography, though that always held in my head, because that difficulty of writing about, not so much about Samilya, but the other people that surround her. But part of one of the difficulties and the frustrations that I had was that the book was paused because she was going through a legal process and her solicitors said, do not publish the book.
Oh, yeah.
So in terms of resilience, it's about, what? What do you mean we can't publish the book? We've just finished it.
Oh.
So then the book became bigger because then we wrote about the legal process at the end of it. But yes. So,
are you at liberty to discuss why it was paused?
So Samilya was going through a process which involved the Catholic Church.
Ah.
And so,
oh my God, so many people.
so many people. So I guess the solicitors were primarily concerned that they would not be able to use any material in the book against her. Which, would they do that? Oh yes, probably they would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think when it comes to something that you maybe don't have all that much recent physical evidence for.
Absolutely.
Or you came from a time where you either couldn't collect the evidence, you were disempowered, or you have lost the evidence since, it may have degraded since. It very much becomes a he said, she said.
That's right.
Or she said, she said situation in this. And then it's all about, I was in part of this for an acupuncture one as well. And the lawyers who were collecting the prosecuting evidence said that fewer people will be called in to testify if they can get more witnesses saying the same thing. So if you could get all of those kids to say the same thing about how they were treated, that then is evidence. But if you've got one person saying it, it could be hearsay.
That's right. Yeah.
Gosh.
So that was part of the frustration.
Is that all resolved now?
That's all finished now. Otherwise, it wouldn't be published.
Yeah, well, you know what? I was wondering if you were the rogue who walked into the decrepit orphanage and then published a book you weren't meant to. And then puts it online.
Because part of my struggle when writing this book was that I resolved that I would always work in Samilya's best interests. And so that wasn't always my best interests. Like, what? Don't publish? No, it was too important to do that, and to go at her pace, not my pace. Like when I gave her a draft of the book to read, I went, okay, let's get together for a weekend, we'll sit together and you can read the book. And she said, and that's not going to work. And so I think it took us 4 months, one night a week, for her to read parts of the book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it was too traumatizing, and I thought, let's just burn through it. Yeah, no, and don't do that.
I'm the same sort of person. I like to just blitz through stuff. And when you've got someone who they've been injured by something, you really got to take it delicately.
Just take the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a healthcare practitioner, it's the same thing. It's like,
absolutely.
As an acupuncturist, when people are frightened of needles, you start with 1, and maybe you work up slowly to 5, and eventually after maybe 6 months of treatment, then they can handle a back full of 20.
Yeah.
But it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like these ingrained visceral reactions within the body, you want them to be relaxed. You want them to have a pleasant experience, and you want them to feel healed by it. Yeah. So powerful. Oh, I'm so looking forward to your talk. I think it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm going to enjoy doing it. and I'm really glad that today I've learned that I don't have to do a lecture. I can do an interactive process, that we can have fun while we do it.
Anne is going to be doing a workshop. So that is one of our new forms for the Writers' Festival, which is a 1.5 hour or 1 and a bit hour workshop formats with a smaller audience. And she will be able to fine-tooth comb some of your work, or to help you structure it better so that you know what's going to work for you, as opposed to just hearing a talk and getting some really good notes. So So you'll get a very personalised touch from Anne when you're at the Writers' Festival this year. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank
This
you.
has been delightful, and I am really looking forward to having a read through that book. I think it's going to be really powerful, and because it's Australian history.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so important.
Untold Australian history.
I love it. I love it. I feel like more and more we are finding parts of history and we're able to uncover the truth. So there's no longer the good old days or a time when humans didn't seem human.
Yeah.
There's no more idealization of, with educated people anyway, there's no more idealization of a particular era. Sometimes you might like the fashion, or you might like the food, you might like the dramatics of a social constraint. But there's no more, they were just like this.
Yes.
And that's so powerful. And I love it when people pull up history, when they encapsulate it, and you can have it as a story.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Very cool. Thank you so much for coming today, Anne. Everyone can come and see you on the 9th and 10th. Well, you should be there on the 10th too. Your talk is on the 9th.
Yep.
But you'll have the stall all the way through
Yep.
on the 10th as well. So anyone that missed your talk can come and chat with you and buy your book.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, we will see you all on the 9th and 10th of September. Have a great day.
Thank you.